Unlock the path to healing with Exposed podcast. Join us as therapists from around the world break mental health taboos, share powerful stories, and provide insights that transform lives. Tune in, educate, and thrive.
Like with my first kiddo, I definitely struggled with postpartum anxiety, and no one caught it. No one did anything. And that's not okay. And there are too many people that have that same story or go through trauma in the perinatal period, and no one notices, no one does anything. And so I really wanted to just fill that gap. 80% of births are traumatic, fun fact, and no one does anything.
Hello and welcome to Expose podcast. Hello and welcome to Expose podcast. Please meet Kielyr Luthi. Kielyr is a compassionate therapist specializing in trauma and parental mental health. She creates supportive space where clients can explore their emotions and heal using techniques like EMDR, which stands for eye movement, deep therapy, and brainspotting. Correct me.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Correct. Which we are going to also share today a little for those who are interested. And with her flexible client-centered approach, Kielyr helps individuals navigate life transitions, whether it is deep exploration or through gentle progress. As a mother of two, she understands the challenges of parenthood, and she's very dedicated to help other individuals, her clients, feel validated and supported. Outside of therapy, Kielyr enjoys family time, outdoor activities, reading, and creating, crafting. Hello, Carol. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we connected.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
At the beginning, I like to always ask my guests why. Why are you doing the work you're doing today? If you can share some of the background story, what made you to especially focus on parental birth trauma, being parental therapies and on birth trauma.
Yeah. So mostly through my own personal journey, to be honest. So my first kiddo was born at the heart of the pandemic. My second kiddo was born in the pandemic. And so I saw just the lack of resources that existed for parents. And looking back, like with my first kiddo, I definitely struggled with postpartum anxiety, and no one caught it. No one did anything. And that's not okay. And there are too many people that have that same story or go through trauma in the perinatal period, and no one notices, no one does anything. And so I really wanted to just fill that gap. 80% of births are traumatic, fun fact, and no one does anything.
80%, wow, that's a lot.
Yes.
Could you a little share what does it mean that those 80% are traumatic? Like, how can we know? Um, just if you could bring a little more awareness on what it is, birth trauma, and
Yeah.
how can we identify it?
Yeah. So birth trauma can be really anything. We know that trauma is in the eye of the beholder, right? So some person could go in and have a totally normal, quote unquote, boring birth. And they could view it as traumatic, right? Because of their own stuff or what have you. And then some people have, like hemorrhaging or C-section or things that are unexpected that come with a lot of recovery. Some people have babies that wind up in the NICU because of various reasons. So having, a baby with more needs and being in the hospital a long time can all be traumatic. I think it really just depends on the individual and their, their resiliency and their own background and just what that means. But I think like just giving birth to a whole other human, like that's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. And it used to be, there was a saying, it takes a village to
Yeah.
raise a child. So how can we as a, friends, family, support a future mother? Is there a way to actually prevent the birth trauma to happen?
Yeah. So I don't know if there's a way to prevent a birth from being traumatic, so to speak, because again, birthing a whole other human, I think, is pretty traumatic. And if you're pregnant, there's only so many ways out. Um, but I think there are things that we can do in preparation. So having like a supportive team in place. So in a perfect world, that's like a therapist, a doula, a supportive OBGYN or midwife, and then supportive network of people. So whether that's like partner, family member, friends, etc., and people that really know like what you are wanting out of your birth. So if you're wanting interventions or not wanting interventions, if you're wanting medication, if you're really wanting to have a vaginal birth or a C-section or whatever that looks like, and being really supportive of that in the moment. I see a lot of people that come to me and they're like, yeah, I have no idea what happened during my birth. No one told me what was going on. And they'll put things in people's IVs and do interventions and never tell the mom about it, which is really kind of scary when you're in the midst of things. And so making sure that you have a team that understands, like, nope, you actually do need to treat me like a person because I am a person, and walk you through that. And then afterwards, giving that mom and the partner, for that matter, the time to just talk through the birth, understand what happened. This is why we did what we did, and this is why this happened, and being able to ask questions about it rather than just never talking about it again and leave people wondering and, not really having an idea of what went on. And then checking in on those parents. So not only the birth giver, but the partner as well, just to see like how they're doing and how they're adjusting, if they need anything, rather than just expecting them to be fine after birthing a whole entire human and then having to heal and adjust and be sleep deprived. And none of that is normal. It's all very hard.
Well, so could you, it's kind of mind-blowing when I think that they don't inform you about all the process they're going on your body, or without you being aware because of the pain, lack of sleep you're going through. You probably are, not really always aware, but um, could you share a little more about some challenges which, a young, n- any mother who is about to give a birth is going through?
Yeah. So there's, I think, a lot of challenges that arise in pregnancy and delivery and postpartum. The biggest one that comes up a lot, I actually talked in depth with a client about this today, is just like changes to your body as you get pregnant, right? So you go from having a body that you've had for however many years, and then all of a sudden you're sharing that space with another human and your body changes, right? Your belly gets bigger, your hips get wider, all of that good stuff. And then you give birth to this small human, and that can be traumatic and is a big change. And then your body is still changed, right? And so that's a really big challenge that I think a lot of women go through. And then there's a whole, a lot of pressure of like, you have to deliver vaginally, C-section is not a real birth, like all of that stuff, right? And then you need to breastfeed, right? Like, don't formula feed, that's bad somehow, like all of those challenges. There's just a lot of pressure. And I feel like not a lot of education on it. No one tells moms, like, yeah, you actually have a lot of choices. Like, you can breastfeed, you can bottle feed, you can do both. And you can have a C section. That's still a totally real birth, and is actually arguably harder because they're cutting through so many layers of flesh to make that happen for you. So there's a lot of, I think, different challenges, and then the loneliness of like birth and motherhood as well, because it's such a vulnerable time. and people want to be there for that new small human, but aren't necessarily wanting to be there for the parents. They're like, oh, when can I see the baby? Not when can I see you? How are you doing? Can I bring something? All of that stuff. So it's arguably one of the hardest times that a lot of people go through in their lives.
Yeah, there's so many changes that you just probably mentioned only a few of those. And in your work, you're working, I mean, as a therapist, a part of your clients are mothers.
Mhm.
Um, is it a new thing, the parental therapy, or I've never, before I'm meeting you, I've never heard that. And you know, what are your views on how, does every mother needs that kind of support, or how can we know if we actually need a parental therapist?
Yeah. So perinatal mental health has always been a thing. I don't think that it's become like a big buzzword until more recently, the last couple of years, where Postpartum International has a certificate program where you can go get certified in perinatal mental health, which is fabulous. And I think there's more people recognizing the need for it versus like 10, 20 years ago. I think that it was just like, well, yeah, you birthed a human and now you're supposed to be fine. There wasn't that, that education and the checking in. And in my opinion, in a perfect world, everyone would find out that they're pregnant and then they would call up a therapist and see someone just to establish that relationship, even if everything is going as perfectly as it can. Again, there are a lot of changes, right? And if you compare it to like moving out for the first time, going to college, right? Like a lot of people in that, I think the statistic is like 80% or 75% of college students are dealing with mental health because that's a really big change, right? And so, like, arguably very similar in the fact that your whole life changes very rapidly. And so, I think that everyone should have a therapist in a perfect world to establish a relationship. And then, if something does come up during, the pregnancy, labor, delivery, postpartum, you already have that relationship with someone that you can be like, okay, I'm struggling and I'm going to tell you and talk about it and get help versus if you wait until things go bad, wait until you are struggling. I hear from so many moms that are like, yeah, I've been struggling for like 6, 9 months and I never got help because I felt like I was failing in some way or this was just how it was supposed to be, right? Versus if you have someone in your corner that is going to check in and, poke you, how are you doing? You want to, talk about it, how's sleep, all of that stuff. You're more likely to actually get the support that you need when you need it and have someone that just, has that background and knows what to look for too.
Wow, there's so much pressure when it comes to delivering the baby, but also delivering in some perfect way, which doesn't exist because who does deliver in a perfect way? I don't know any woman who did. Um, but for some reason, there is this. Where is that coming from? That conditioning of how you should give a birth, like, was it always like that, or is it in our culture here? Um, Tell me a little more about your thoughts on the roots of this tension in the air when it comes to, you know, coming from outside on you. This is
Mhm.
your body. This is your body. Like this is your business. How you going to deliver it? Nobody else. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from just society and again, lack of education and lack of like talking and understanding of it as well. Like to hear that you're struggling postpartum, like that somehow makes you, less of a perfect mom. Perfect moms don't exist, um, let alone the rest of it, right? Like I think society has a big role in that where it's just really hard to, just feel the way you need to feel and have it happen the way it happens because we all have these ideas that I don't know, just have been passed down. And I think it's been a relatively recent thing where people, are recognizing like, no, it's okay to struggle. It's okay to have a birth that wasn't ideal. And it's okay to talk about it. versus before, all of these things were still happening. I just think that no one felt comfortable talking about it. And even now, it's still, I have plenty of clients that are therapists that have given birth, so they know a lot, and still wait, 3, 6, 9 months before reaching out because they're like, I just thought it was supposed to be hard.
I had chills when you said that. Wow. You mentioned so many times the postpartum. I mean, it brings, I feel like talking about it brings some kind of expectation. So our audience who might, you know, be a future mothers or planning another child, they by listening to it can develop more compassion, understanding to their own timing and what comes up. Mm. Would you like to talk a little about postpartum, what it is, how it, what are the signs? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So many people that specialize in perinatal mental health will tell you that postpartum is defined from like anywhere from right after giving birth up until 3 years postpartum. So 3 years after giving your baby, or birthing your baby, which is a really long time. And so that is really what we look for anywhere from conception to 3 years postpartum is when people are at risk for perinatal mental health. So things like postpartum depression, anxiety, PTSD, all of that good stuff. And the reason for that is because, again, there's so many changes during that time, right? So you go from being just a person who's living their life to suddenly sharing your body with someone to birthing that human and then breastfeeding or bottle feeding and then having to like become a parent when there's really no handbook for that. So figuring it out. And then you throw in the fact that you're not getting a lot of sleep, right? Babies wake up every 2 to 3 hours to be fed because their bellies are so small. So if you think about getting 8 hours of sleep in only 2 hour increments, like that is a form of torture in some countries, to be honest. um, and so a lot of things that we look for with that postpartum period, especially, are things like having difficulty sleeping outside of what is normal. Obviously, getting sleep in 2 to 3 hour increments not ideal. You're going to struggle with that in some fashion, but if you're having trouble falling back asleep or staying asleep once you do get asleep, that would be something that we would look for. Difficulty with eating, so not having an appetite or feeling like you're eating too much outside of what is normal, because breastfeeding mothers are, frankly, they're ravenous because they're feeding another human, and that is pretty normal. Um, and then we also look for just kind of feeling down or depressed. So feeling like, what's the purpose? I'm not good enough, things like that. Worrying about the baby more than what is normal. So you just had a brand new human, you're going to worry about it a little bit. That's pretty normal. But if you're like, oh my gosh, are they still breathing? Are they still okay in there? I can't sleep because what if something happens? Or so and so can't hold them because, what if something happened? I can't shower because what if I'm not there? That would obviously be a big sign as well. And then sometimes just like really random, irrational thoughts, like, what if I drop my baby down the stairs? Or what if that bottle isn't clean and they get really sick? Things like that, they don't really have foundation in. And then in partners, we look for irritability. So just kind of being more irritable than what is normal. And again, factoring in like sleep deprivation. We're not our best selves when we're sleep deprived. So some irritability is expected, but a lot of irritability is not. And then checking out. So that's like the dad that's sitting on the couch just scrolling on Facebook because, he needs to just not be present in that moment. And again, some amount of that totally normal because we're a society that lives on our phones. But also, like you just had a new baby, and if you're checking out 95% of the time, then that's probably not super normal. Um, so yeah, those are kind of some of the big ones that we typically look for.
Yeah. Are there any genetics like with like those tendencies? Like if our mother had this kind of tendency, is it possible that we might, need to look more into being more like checking or having people checking with us if we're doing fine, maybe even asking others to do it once a week check out, because we know we are not going to be the first calling them.
Yeah, that's a great question. So risk factors overall. So genetics definitely does play a role. So if you have a family history of anxiety, depression, bipolar, things like that, you're more at risk, even if you yourself didn't have any of those things prior to pregnancy. Um, and then if you yourself have a history of anxiety, depression, anything like that, you're more at risk as well. Low social support is also a risk factor. So if you don't have a strong social network, if you don't have like a partner that you can rely on or family, that's more at risk as well. Um, but overall, perinatal mood and anxiety disorders affect everyone equally. So there are people that are more at risk, but there's no like, oh, you make $5 million a year, so you're not gonna get that. Or you have 5,000 people that support you and have all the nannies in the world, so you're not gonna get that. None of that exists. It affects every race, socioeconomic status, gender equally. So there's not any, there are some protective factors for sure, but there's nothing where like, oh, if I do this, then I won't get it, or I'll be fine. So that's, I think, the good and bad news of it, right? Like,
um, wow, there's so many, you mentioned so many cases, which I'm glad to have to be the one to interview you because in my own future, parenthood, I would love to for sure stay in touch with you, I guess, or just
yeah.
knowing that it exists helps. You don't have to do it alone. And could we, there's this word postpartum depression. Um, if we can talk a little about that, like I feel there is this self-judgment, like for women, like condemnation of I shouldn't feel this way, and even though we understand the hormones changes, but it's how to deal with that. If you could maybe at the beginning start a little bit with defining what it is, and I know it's a lot of questions, but maybe we can connect it, like if there is a way to predict that I might be getting into that. Mm,
Mhm. Yeah, so that's a great question. So after giving birth, there are a lot of hormone changes, like you said, because you go from your body having to grow an entire human to not very suddenly. And then if you're breastfeeding, there are more hormones involved with that as well. And so usually like 3 to 5 days after birth, people naturally feel a little bit of a low, because your hormones are starting to bottom out. And you might just feel like, oh my gosh, the world is really overwhelming. How am I supposed to do this? And so that is normal. That is what some people refer to as the baby blues. Um, but postpartum depression is when things like that don't go away. So if you're feeling like that for like a week or two after birth, then that's really indicative of a bigger problem. Um, and so if you're feeling, again, like this is really overwhelming, I don't know how to feed this baby, or I can't ever get sleep again, like some of that catastrophizing or fighting with your spouse a lot and not feeling supportive, all of those things are just big things, right? Not seeing the point in eating or overeating, at the both extremes, not wanting to like get out of the house, not feeling like you can be motivated to do things is another really big sign. Um, and early intervention is really helpful, right? So if you notice this and get help, then you're going to have a higher likelihood of it not lasting super long, versus if you just kind of let yourself stew in it. And those are usually the parents that are like, well, parenthood is just supposed to be hard, right? Which, yes, parenthood is hard, not to discount that, but it's not supposed to feel so heavy, so overwhelming that you can't do anything else. You need to be able to go get your hair cut and go out to lunch with a friend and, take a shower, all of those good things. Um, and so reaching out to a therapist, or sometimes people will start with like their OBGYN or their midwife, whoever helped through the birth journey, and just talking to them. There are screeners that exist, for that reason that OBGYNs will sometimes use. Um, and then, seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist to help with that. So for myself, like we mentioned at the beginning, I'm certified in EMDR and Brainspotting. And so I do a lot of that in my practice, and they're really cool and effective at really just helping us to feel better. But other people use like CBT, and things like that. And sometimes it's postpartum depression that is stirring up a lot of things from childhood as well. So a lot of times it's not just I gave birth and now I have to deal with postpartum depression. A lot of times it's I gave birth and now I'm thinking about how I was parented or how I don't have support or, a lot of those big things as well, which I feel like naturally kind of come up as we transition into parenthood. We can't help but think about how we ourselves were parented. And that can be good and bad, right? If you're parented really well, then it's like, oh, I want to emulate that and it's going to be great. Or if you had a really challenging childhood, it's like, oh my gosh, how do I not become my mother? Which can be, another facet of that as well, where it can stir up, other mental health stuff. So getting help, talking to someone, feeling supported, and just being able to process kind of what you're going through is really helpful in that time.
Mm, I found it so thank you for sharing it. And Kielyr, um I found it so interesting what you mentioned. Is that the right way to pronounce your name? I always feel like Kielyr, right? Yeah.
Kielyr, yep.
Kielyr. Oh my God, I didn't pronounce it then. Kielyr.
I feel like the way you say it with your accent sounds so much cooler. So
That's okay, but I want to get it the way, it should be. Kielyr. Thanks for your understanding.
mhm.
Um, wow. I mean, that's so interesting what you mentioned that many times the things which come up with the postpartum depression, those are not just the chemical balance changes, hormones, but as well our own childhood, traumatic events or the way we were brought up.
Mm.
And it kind of gets to the point we have to face them. And you mentioned you are using this EMDR and brain spotting, which does. I'm thinking like how effective it is for someone who is so we are not balanced in this moment. I understand we're easily triggered, and those
Mm.
tools are very powerful. So for somebody who's considering but is afraid, like, oh my God, like, can I handle even more emotions? Like, this is going to be really uncomfortable. Could you speak a little or share some client situation of how what can what can you expect from it, and do you need to prepare somehow to sessions with those techniques when you're
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, so therapy in any facet is really hard, right? When people first come to therapy, they typically have a little bit of a low, right? It's like poking a bear, right? Like the bear is always around, and once you poke it, it's going to get angry and might start attacking you a little bit, and you're going to feel like crap. But then eventually the goal is to get the bear to go away, right? And there's not really a way to do that if you just ignore the bear and pretend it's not there. So yes, usually people do feel worse. And I always joke with my clients that, oh, that's how we know it's working. um, in a really like dark sense of humor sort of way. Um, but the good news is about like EMDR and brain spotting is that usually that doesn't last very long. Because those techniques are really effective. And EMDR in particular works by desensitizing memories. And so it's hard as you kind of get into the like meat and potatoes of it, but then we desensitize it and it becomes like, oh, I had spaghetti for dinner last night, right? Like it's just something that happened to you rather than, oh my gosh, I can't even think about this because I feel so sad and hurt and overwhelmed, right? Like it's just like, no, I that happened and I can handle it now, right? So that sense of empowerment, which is really valuable. Um, so yeah, it is really hard not to discount it, but I've never had a single person that I worked with at least that has been like, "Oh, I wish we didn't do that. I wish I didn't get to this point where I feel better."
And just even knowing, that at the beginning you're going to feel even, lower, um, also helps, so you can prepare yourself when it comes up. And you also are working with animals in your treatments. Yes?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
Could you share some benefits of and cases it is actually beneficial, more beneficial to use this animal assisted therapy?
Yeah. So I am 100% virtual. So I see people in their homes, right? So it's really awesome because then that means that I get to selfishly meet all of their animals and I love animals, so that's a good thing. Also means I get to meet their babies, which also a highlight of my day. Uh, but it is so cool to see the way that animals are healing. I had a client just earlier this week, actually, not a mom, but just going through a really bad breakup. And she was sitting there and she was, crying as she was telling me about kind of what happened and how she was feeling. And her cat comes up and it's just you can see the cat like jump up on her little desk or whatever it is, and then just like worms his way into her arms, like, here I am. And you could see like such a big shift, like as that person goes from telling me what was happening just by herself to telling me with this cat in her arms by force. She didn't have a choice over whether the cat was there or not. The cat decided that that's where he was going to be. And it was so helpful. Like she immediately, you could see she got calmer. She felt more capable. And the cat was just really comforting to her, which is huge. And I see that happen all the time where it just helps people feel more grounded. And in regular therapy, that's something that I know a lot of clinicians will recommend to their clients, where it's like, okay, get like a rabbit foot or something to like pet, to help you feel grounded in a moment. And that's what animals do, except for it's an alive thing. And it can also be really motivating. Like if you think of a mom that, new mom who's really, really tired and doesn't have motivation to, maybe eat or shower or whatever it is. Well, if you have this dog or cat or whatever that is like, hey, I need to be fed. I'm not going to leave you alone until you feed me. Chances are they're going to get out of bed so that they can feed that animal, right? Which could be so helpful, and then helpful to build routines around it as well. Where, okay, I have to feed, my dog, and now I'm already in the kitchen, so I might as well make myself something to eat as well, right? Kind of helps them with that routine, keep them on track, as well as just help them feel better and grounded. And so it is really marvelous. I don't know that like freshly postpartum would be the time to get a new animal because that might be overwhelming, but having an animal that's pre-established can be really, really helpful, I think.
Thank you for sharing that parental tip. And you have been mother, I mean, you deliver baby during the pandemic. Could you
Mhm.
share a little some of the challenges you faced and how was the world for you back then, and what you wish you received, like what you craved and you didn't receive during the whole mindfuckery which was going on.
Yes. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that COVID took away from myself, as well as any mom that delivered in a pandemic, and I know lots of them, is just the lack of social support. Like, if you imagine COVID and how we were all really struggling with the isolation and wanting to see friends or family and not being able to, wanting to have social gatherings, whatever. And then imagine a new mom who doesn't get any of that and has a new human, right? So there's not someone to, be like, oh, I had a rough night. Can you come over and help catch up with laundry or hold the baby so I can shower or whatever it is? You didn't have that, right? Because there wasn't anyone that could because of COVID. And then you throw in the fact that you have this new little human who is, they don't have big immune systems, right? Because they're fresh new babies. And so then having just the pandemic going on and just that being a possibility of something that could happen to your baby, whether it's having someone come over to help or, I'm going to bring my child in for their normal like pediatric appointment, right? And knowing that like I have to wear a mask, but babies can't mask, right? And so they're more exposed to things. So that's a lot. I think that like a little social support was the biggest piece of the pandemic for myself and many moms. And then also just missing out. Like, I didn't have this personally because just the timeline, I had a baby shower before the pandemic. But there were moms that never got a baby shower because you couldn't have people, right? And so you're missing out on those normal just milestones that people usually get really excited for. Or I know a lot of people nowadays do gender reveals, right? Not being able to have that, missing out on that. Or like having to wear a mask during labor, which let me tell you, that is not fun.
You're kidding me. You had to wear masks. That's what it was for the mothers. Oh
Yes.
my God. Like that's is it like that can make you faint, I guess.
Yep.
Right? Because I mean, that's an extreme moment of delivery and not being able to get the full oxygen.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, that impacts. So that's what I wanted to ask you before. Is it true that the babies are remembering all the 9 months in the belly? And if yes, then if you could share how much the research shows or proves, or what are your intuitive insights into that? And if that can
Yeah.
actually impact their temperament or their, nervous system, how can we know that? Like if, if they actually um in some way were impacted through, those 9 months, especially I feel like in pandemic that was very, very different level of cortisol than normally there was for mothers. We didn't have this
Yeah.
time family to release part of that. I mean, I wasn't the mother, but I feel like I can, I can, connect with mothers from my female instinct. But yes, if you could share that, because, um, hopefully those who are listeners, if they hear some of those insights, or maybe they can, have the baby have a better start, in the first few weeks when we recognize, oh, this is irregular behavior, or, you know, and also I was very tense during my pregnancy. I might look for help.
Yeah. That's a great question. So a lot of research suggests that babies do feel what we feel during pregnancy. And so that's why we tell people like don't put off getting help, right? Like if it's like I have clients, for example, that I work with them and then they get pregnant, right? So like we're working on stuff prior to pregnancy and we don't ever tell them, okay, now stop therapy because you don't want to stress out the baby, right? We tell them your body's already holding this stress, so let's continue to get rid of it so that your baby doesn't feel that, right? Um, and we do the best we can, right? Like it's not live in a bubble and don't experience any stress during pregnancy, right? Like that's not practical and would probably be really isolating. But it's more so like try to make your environment, as calm as possible, whatever is reasonable, right? Because some of that does transfer to the baby. And I think that there's more research now looking into like what makes babies colicky. And I think that that is one of the things that they're looking at is like stress from the mom during pregnancy and how that transfers because a lot of our, like cortisol and all of those other things, like baby experiences those as well. Let alone just like if our body is really tense, like your baby's living inside of your body, right? So like that makes a lot of sense too. And then postpartum as well, right? Like if you're really stressed, the baby's going to pick up on that. I read a research study a while ago that was about like vibrations of people. We all vibrate at different frequencies. And if you think of like a mom with a new baby who just has been screaming for hours and they can't figure out why, right? And you're just getting really upset and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to comfort you. You're going to start vibrating at a different frequency and you're less likely to be able to calm that baby down versus if, partner suddenly swoops in, you hand off the baby and then they suddenly quiet. It's usually because that fresh person is vibrating at a very calm frequency and babies can sense that, right? And so if you're going into postpartum feeling really stressed and have a lot of those outside pressures and things, like it is going to affect your child in that way as well.
That was great. Thank you, Kielyr. Get it right. As we're getting to the end, and we'll talk about your website, how people can work and connect with you. Just a very last question about, working with you or another parental therapist versus childbirth schools. That's the word, I think. What are your thoughts on, do we need both? What's the, pros and cons?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think both are valuable. I think like in my work with clients, we do a lot of talking about like birth and birth plan and whatever. But it's kind of outside my scope to teach them like, well, here are the breathing techniques and here how you can push and here's the positions that work and don't work and all of those things where like a childbirth class is really helpful. And so I think like if you can swing both, financially and scheduling wise and all of that stuff, it is really valuable. Especially because childbirth classes, you can include your partner versus like there's certainly couples therapy, and I see couples as well, but like therapy is just a whole different realm and is really a space for just more like intimate thoughts and feelings rather than like here's what we do in the nitty gritty of the moment when you're in labor. So I think both, yeah.
Muted. Um, you're a mother and you're a professional therapist and, doing many things. As we are getting to the last question, what are your, advices on balancing career, motherhood, time alone? What did you discover?
That I'm still working on it and I'm an imperfect person. We all are. Um, I think that it is really hard to be a mom and a working mom and a human and all of those things. And dads and partners too. Like they're not exempt from it just because they don't birth a human. But I think that taking as much time as you can with the baby. I know that like I literally just made a Facebook post about this the other day about how parental leave for a lot of people is so short. Just typically due to financial constraints for people, have a baby and then their partner goes back to work right away. I hear that all the time. and it is really hard. So taking as much time as you can, making sure that you're trying to be present in those moments because it's cliche, but they are only little once, right? So spend time looking at that sleeping baby, hold the sleeping baby if you need to. There's nothing wrong with it. And find that balance in what it looks like for you. There are some people that love working, and that is such a huge part of their identity that they want to continue working full time after having their baby, and that's awesome. There are other people that that's overwhelming and they want to work less or don't want to work at all. Also awesome, right? Like you have to find that balance for yourself. And then probably my biggest piece of advice is to just remember that you are a human and have needs as well. You can't pour from an empty cup. So you do actually need time for yourself and your partner. You need to be able to have a hobby and take a shower and go out to lunch. You need to be able to do all those things, and your kiddos are actually going to be better for it because you're modeling such good things, right? Of I can take care of myself and take care of you. And I feel better when I do X, Y, and Z, right? So put yourself first, even though it's really, really hard.
And thank you for mentioning about the finances, how sometimes, the tight budget can make one of the parents go back to work. And there are so many individuals who are waiting to get, even pregnant until they are financially, doing well, so they can dedicate, as much time as they need. Um, I guess there is no wrong or right. Whatever you feel like is good. Like just like you mentioned, you're a human. Um,
There's no perfect time to have a baby.
yeah. Like even if you think I get the finance, something else can like come up with, um and I guess it is a human worry of like, will I have enough money to have a child? Like how much money do I need?
Yeah.
This is 20 years of support, constant support. Um, is this a normal thought to have when you are like planning a motherhood, and uh, and what do you? I know this is extra question, but it came up as you were.
Yeah.
Would you like to share some thought on your wisdom on that, to that kind of worry?
Yeah, I would say it's very, very normal, especially because like childcare costs are so expensive. Like there are many people that spend several thousands of dollars a month on childcare alone, let alone like food and clothes and all the things babies need, right? Like crib and all of that stuff, right? So it is a very real concern and a very hard one. And I think a lot of why there are so many people like being stay-at-home parents, because at the end of the day, they realize like, well, if I go to work, I wouldn't actually be making any money because I would be putting it all towards childcare, right? Which is just a really harsh reality, unfortunately. Um, and, there are a lot of like supports out there as far as like government supports for childcare and things like that, and leaning on family members when you're able to, or friends, or fluctuating work hours, or what have you, right? So it is a really real and valid concern. And how much money do you need before you have a baby, right? Like, no one knows that. And I think the answer is probably you're never going to feel like you have enough. Um, and so it is a really hard thing. And there are all sorts of families that make that work, right? Of all different socioeconomic statuses. And so again, no good time to have a baby, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kyler, for being here and spreading the awareness. And for those who are curious about how they can work with you, what would you say? How they can find you? And I will
Yeah.
attach all the links, by the way. I will attach all the links.
Yeah, perfect. So website has a lot of good information. I do see clients in 7 different states. I'm licensed in 7 states and working on an eighth one because I have a licensure problem. I also do like parental leave coaching and stuff, which is not state specific, which also on our website, all of that good stuff. And I do offer free consultations for people as well. So even if you're, not in a state where I could see you for therapy and just need help finding support or wondering about something, always feel free to reach out. Therapists tend to know how to find other therapists. So, but yeah, our website has a lot of really good information on it.
That was Kielyr Luthi. Okay, now you teach me the surname. Oh my God.
Luthi.
Luthi, okay.
I have one of those names. It's fine.
That was Kielyr Luthi. Ladies and gentlemen, Kielyr Luthi. Thank you all for watching. And if you know anyone planning to become a future mother or father, please share this episode and check the links below. Goodbye. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and please subscribe my YouTube channel. For you, it's a one click. For me, it means the possibility to continue creating impact in the world with those videos. Thank you, and see you soon.